We'll give our attendees a few moments to log in. All right, welcome everyone to Preview Week for Willamette, the Pinot Noir auction. The wines featured in this tasting series are small lot bottlings for our exclusive trade auction. Contact Emily at the WVWA, and I'll drop her email address in the chat if you don't know about the auction and you'd like to learn more. For this year's auction, we're pleased to announce a charitable partnership with the James Beard Foundation's Food and Beverage Investment Fund for Black and Indigenous Americans as a part of their Open for Good campaign. All funds raised on auction lots beyond the opening bids, as well as through the Paddle Raise pledge, will go to their investment fund, and I'll drop their website in the chat as well. I'd like to take a moment as well to thank our auction sponsors for their ongoing support. And now I'd like to feature today's panelists and introduce you all. Representing Lot 61, Rachel Rose of Bryn Mawr Vineyards. Representing Lot 62, Bryan Weil of Alexana. Representing Lot 63, Brent Stone of King Estate. And representing Lot 64, John Pataccoli of Redhawk Vineyard and Winery. And now I'll kick it off to our host, David Adelsheim of Adelsheim. David, they're all yours.
Thanks, Julia. It's exciting to not be on the first day and to watch all the other seminars make all the mistakes so that we could have a perfect presentation today. Yeah, thanks for laughing because we will do what we do. This is a wonderful seminar because we have a great range of people with huge experience and also a geographic range with Brent Stone from King Estate in the southern Willamette and the rest of us from up closer to the northern end, but still in really three different AVAs. Rachel and Jan Pataccoli represent sort of the same general region, but even they are in very different sectors of their own AVA. The first thing, though, I wanted to do is have everybody chat a bit about the 2018 vintage. Those who are on this call may know that all the auction lots, all 90 lots, are from the 18 vintage. And it's actually quite a special vintage. So perhaps we could go, at least for now, in lot order. Rachel, what do you think about the 18 vintage?
Yeah, so I'm, in addition to being the winemaker, I'm our vineyard director as well. So I think that the thing for viticulturally that was really different about the 2018 vintage is it was very dry. Our vineyards are all dry farmed as well. And so when we have lack of summer rain, it really starts to show in the vines. One of the things that I think worked out very well for the 2018 vintage, despite the relative low precipitation, was, you know, for us on our site, we're on a high hill. It's a very cool site. It never got too hot. And I think that the way that those kind of vintage characteristics manifested themselves in my wine, at least, is it gave the wines a lot of structure and also a lot of density. And that's something that I can kind of tie the thread from how the grapes were grown in the season into the wine.
Super, thanks. Bryan, what are your general comments about the vintage?
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up here in Oregon and seen quite a few vintages, and I think 18 is definitely one to remember. I think of these, you know, these bottles as time capsules, and it's really fun to remember these times. Sometimes not so much, but I think 18 for sure was one of those vintages. It was just a really special one. Typically here in our Dundee Hills estate, where we have 56 acres planted and 48 of those are Pinot Noir, a Pinot Noir will come off in roughly 7, 10, 14 days pretty quickly, especially in warmer years or maybe years that were kind of buttoned up to the rain and inevitably in end of September, October. So I vividly remember this being a pretty cruisy vintage in this fact that we definitely kind of cooled down. We had a little bit kind of real small pockets of rain after that 100+ days of being dry and a really warm vintage. But I think we've got a lot of good hang time. And so the people that have some of these wines in their glasses this morning, I think you see a lot of color and structure, like Rachel said, and being able to kind of pick and choose these different blocks was really a special thing, I think, in the 2018 vintage. And it was, you weren't forced by the weather. I think it was a winemaker's vintage where you really got to pick. Even 3 or 5 days is a huge difference here in Oregon and in the Willamette Valley. So it was a really special vintage, and I just love the fruit forwardness that you're getting to see already in these wines. But that structure and that moderate alcohol with great acidity because of that weather we had in September or October, I think it's going to make these ones for the ages.
Super. Brent, from your perspective, what did 2018 look like?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Rachel and Bryan said. I mean, it was a fantastic vintage. One of the better in recent memory for us. Moderate growing season compared to kind of a string of warm years that we had 14, 15, 16, all being a little bit more on the warm side for the valley. For us, we're pretty high elevation site. We're at about 1,100 feet, so we come on late anyway. And it pushed us, even more into October with a lot of our estate picks. But we had such good weather, warm but not overly hot, and dry fall that, similar to what Bryan was saying, we did a lot of just kind of small lot picks, which again is advantageous for us as a winery in that, we're a larger winery, but we've never really grown our fermenter size. We don't go bigger than 8 tons on a ferment, and we've got hundreds of tanks. And so we're built for vintages like that, where we can really get down to the block level. And we were just bringing it in, a block at a time. And we have not always had that luxury. We've kind of been forced by weather or capacity issues. So the wine's got a lot of love, similar to kind of what both Bryan and Rachel were saying. The wines show a lot of fruit, almost kind of like 16, but there's a lot of great structure. A lot of good tannin. In our case, we carried a lot of acidity too. So I think they're going to be ageable wines. I think they're showing very well now, but I think they'll bottle age beautifully too. So all in all, a fantastic vintage.
Super. John, from your perspective, how did you handle the 2018 vintage?
Well, I'll echo what everybody said. I think it's just a terrific vintage. I mean, balanced. We are also 100% dry farmed, so that 100 days of no rain did stress. And I was more concerned about tannins than pretty much anything else. And you could have just left everything alone and kind of hands off, and you would have created really nice wines. But we were a little more concerned about the tannin level. So we tried to address that a little bit. But overall, we're just have great balanced wines that echo what Brent said, that are drinking well now, but I really think have a long life in front of them. It really reminds me of 12, but not quite as ripe, not quite as high sugars as 12. But I'm hoping this vintage ends up like 12. That's kind of where I'm hoping this goes.
I see Brent nodding his head about the relationship with 12. Rachel or Bryan, what are your thoughts on what other vintage 2018 reminds you of?
Yes, I totally agree with John. In so much, we opened up a bottle of 12 last night, just to kind of check on it and just kind of see, this kind of feels the same. But I think there's more acidity and a little bit more life to the 18s.
Don't have a whole lot more to add. I think they nailed it. 12, 16, I think a combo of the both in terms of weather, but also in terms of chemistry in the final wines and just how they show. I think 12 to me had a bit more structure, and 16 was a bit more fruit forward in the beginning. So I think you combine those two and you're seeing what the 18s are going to be, which is just, it's lovely.
As a general statement, would you guys agree with this comment that 14, 15, 16, 17 were actually the warmest vintages we've ever had, but that 18 broke that mold and was a cooler vintage after that? In fact, is probably the coolest vintage as in terms of the growing season since 2011. I think cooler than 12, in fact. Yep.
Yeah, I think it was it was seemed like a longer season, and we had a really good bud break and bloom, and but it wasn't overly big in yields. I think that's the one thing we definitely saw. 14 being the warmest vintage on record, and then 15 came around and beat that, and then 16, 17 continued to go, and right after 17 being a fairly high yield vintage, I think 15 and 17 both were fairly big for us, big clusters and everything. 18 kind of toned back down to what I would consider more normal yields, 2.5 plus or minus a bit tons per acre, and I think it really helped with some of that concentration and just a bit more delicate flavors, and that hang time helped a lot.
So what I'm hearing is that in your general view of the vintage, it has the tannin from being a relatively small crop level. It has good acidity as well from being a cooler vintage, but it's got real concentration, which certainly sound like the elements that you'd want in a wine to age.
No question.
So the next phase of this presentation, I'd like to go to each winemaker in succession and ask them to tell us about the winery themselves, and particularly focus on the wine lot that is in the auction. So again, we'll go through by lot order, lot 61 from Bryn Mawr. Rachel?
Yeah, so the cuvee itself is called, let's see if you guys can see it. So this is our lot. It's called the Final Flight. And that has everything to do with the winery that we have been for many years. So I joined Bryn Mawr in 2010, and we're in the Eola Amity Hills on Bethel Heights Road. Something that makes the vineyard a little bit different is that it's on the western crest, and so we get hit with the winds from the Van Duzer. And so it's spans 650 to about 850 feet. So it's a really temperature, it's very dynamic. It can get very warm because we're very exposed, but on the flip side of that, it also gets very cold because of the elevation and the winds. And so the winery, in the 10 years that I've been at Bryn Mawr, we used to make wine in a tent, and I made wine pretty much completely outside. Everything we did was outside, racking, fermentation. So during harvest, we would get a big 40 by 40, and it became even larger, wedding tent. And we're a really late harvest site, and so we're talking typically we were doing ferments in October and well into November, and so it was really cold and very, very difficult to do. And twice the tent blew away. So kind of like it was just crazy. I mean, you think about how hard vintage is, and then it's like, wow, we're going to get 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts. We have to take the tent down. Where are we going to put ferments? Where are we going to put the barrels? And it was just, oh my gosh, I was in it, so I just dealt with it. But in retrospect, it's definitely formed the winemaker that I am. And so this wine, the wine that we made this year, pays tribute to who we've been, because this is the first wine completely vinified in a building. So we built our winery, our brand new winery, in 2018. And so this is the first wine made under a roof that won't fly away. And in addition to that, it's also vinified exclusively from grapes that we planted intentionally. When I came on, we had 4 acres of pretty well-established vines, but in 2010 and 2012, we did a pretty big establishment for our small site. So we've got a 40-acre in total property. And so the 2018 is made from grapevines that were planted in 2012. So it's the first time that we have made wines from grapes that we intentionally planted and really shows the trajectory and the beginning of a new chapter with the winery and everything, and my own winemaking as well. And so that is why this wine is called The Final Flight, and it really just goes back to everything that we've been doing up until now. So this marks the beginning of a new chapter.
Rachel, in the description of your wine, it says, "We finally tamed the mouth-bruising tannins that bullied our winemaking for years."
Yes.
So was that doing it inside magically made that happen?
To some extent, absolutely. Of course, this is a panel of winemakers, so we can all attest to how important temperature is, not only just for control, but in shaping how tannins are extracted, the formation of them early, later on, and talking about really, really cold ferments, which I think has driven a little bit of my style, because I believe they bring on a little bit more aromatic profile. I always really had, I would say, it was a real challenge to get softness from the wine, because I feel like I never got that warmth with the ferments, because we get the Van Duzer that would come through in the evenings and my ferment temps would just drop. And that, I would say, is also hand in hand with our site. So it's very, very rocky and it's windy. And so I'm bringing in fairly high tannin grapes for Pinot Noir. And so without having that temperature control of being able to get ferments warm enough, I believe really had a lot to do with that early polymerization of tannins. And so the 2018 was the very first vintage I was able to have consistently warmer ferments during peak. And also I did more post-fermentation maceration this vintage than I had ever before. Something that John said earlier, I was very concerned about tannins. They've been kind of like my nemesis. And so going into this vintage, it was so high acid and so high tannin. We did almost exclusively pump overs to be super gentle. But then at the end, I did up to 30 to 36 days on skins, because I just really, really was able to be able to do that safely now that I was in a building. And I feel like it has just made these wines like dense and chewy. And it's something I would have never been able to do in my cold tent ever. So, yeah.
Well, I'm missing the opportunity to be able to walk over to your table and taste this wines with 30 days of post-fermentation maceration. Let's move on to Bryan, lot 62.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to follow up with alfresco wine making and Wizard of Oz tent flying, but I'll try my best. I'm Bryan Weil. I'm the winemaker here at Alexana. I've actually been here, going to go on 9 years. Grew up in West Salem, actually not too far from John's place. Spent a lot of holiday weekends drinking wine over at his beautiful winery. But yeah, it's been a fun ride here. I was able to come on board to finish up the 2011s with Lynn Penarash, who was our consultant winemaker and original winemaker from 2006 to 2015. She worked with us. But in 2012, we built the winery together here in the Dundee Hills, kind of on the backside, a really special space here. And went to Oregon State for winemaking. I was a chef before that. And I've been able to work at a 2,000 case winery in Corvallis and a 1 million case winery in Washington. But my goal was always to come back to Oregon and do it kind of at a medium, small scale. And so that's where we're at now with 56 acres here to pull from. And like I said, 48 of those are Pinot Noir. And on top of that, we have a really fun site back here because we're not the typical Dundee Hills site that's 100% Jory, really deep, clay soil. We're on what I call kind of the backside, which is more a lot of north-facing slopes, which people are starting to plant around us. But fortunately enough, almost all of our vineyards southeast and west facing, kind of this undulation back. So it's a really fun pocket, but a lot of diverse soils with the typical Nikaya and Jory soils, which would be the volcanics. But then on our west side at the lower elevations, that's next to kind of closer to Ken Wright's Guadalupe Vineyard and Domaine Serene's Two Barns Farm and Thomas Vineyard. You get a lot of the uplifted marine sedimentary. So it's a really diverse site to work with. And then on top of that, we have 11 different clones of Pinot Noir. So it's been a really fun evolution here. We also have some white wine grapes, but predominantly we're a Pinot Noir site, and it's a really fun wine to make here, or the estate blend, I should say, because it's pretty easy. We have a gravity flow winery here that Dr. Moderator, the owner, who's a cardiologist in Houston, has been great to outfit with some of the best of equipment, and just a great facility and great vineyard. So it's really my job, just don't screw it up when you have great grapes, get it through the process soundly. We use mostly native yeast in our 2 and 3 ton fermentations. That's as big a fermentation tank that we have. And very gentle pressing and put down to mostly neutral, but a little bit of new French oak. And so for 18, I wanted to kind of do something different. And I've actually been muting my mic a little bit because my team is trying to be loud in the background. My massive team of 3 people downstairs, they're actually putting together the 2019 blends right now. And one of those is the barrel auction. So we've been really, it's been fun. We've been doing this since the beginning. I'm missing getting together with my colleagues and friends because it's one of my favorite things going to these auctions. We have Salute and we have the barrel auction, and it's really fun to go see a snapshot of that vintage from all your different colleagues and see the 2018 vintage with 100 different people and their take on it. And nowhere else do you really get to see a singular vintage all at once from some of the top producers in all of Oregon. So the barrel auction is fun. I'm missing it. I wish we could all be together, but we'll act like we are. And people always go, man, you're drinking at 9 a.m. That's crazy. And I go, that just seems like a normal day to me. So, you know, pick up on a Thursday. It's our Friday here because we work 4/10. You know, a fun site to work with. So we wanted to do something a little different 2018. We had this opportunity with this really long hanging vintage, a bit more time to kind of pick and choose. So typically, like I said, we're about a 14-day pick, but we were able to really pick 3 or 4 weeks off the estate. And so this was about I want to say about 14 days on this blend that we picked a couple different lots. But for one of them specifically that I wanted to do for this barrel auction, typically we keep things separate. All the clones are separate. We only have about an acre or 2 as our biggest blocks out here. So we individually ferment 1 or 2 tanks from those blocks, keep them separate throughout the aging. But this year, I was like, man, things are really ripening nicely. So what I did on the east side of our vineyard, which is all volcanic, I pulled in about 5 different clones of Pinot Noir. I picked a couple bins of each, and I filled a 2-tonner, and I co-fermented those different clones, which is not very typical for us. I tend to do it if I run out of tank space and have an extra 5 bins of this and an extra 5 bins of this. But this year we decided to really specifically actively pick a bunch of different blocks that maybe weren't 100% there, but like a shotgun or Massal selection or whatever, a block that has a bunch of different clones within it. You get some of those blocks that maybe have a bit more acidity and maybe not so much green, but a little bit more on the less ripe side. And you maybe get some that are overripe, but it's this nice curve. So we decided to pick these 5 different clones together, co-ferment them, barrel age them separately. And then we loved it so much, we just really tweaked it a little bit. So this is mostly Dijon, which is what we co-fermented 5 Dijon clones. And then at the end, when we were blending up a massive 15.5 gallon keg of barrel auction, I had my employees pull a couple gallons out of some of my favorite Pomard and Badensville clone barrels that were some of the original plantings here in Oregon. So it's a really fun, complex blend. I opened it at about 8, and it's still just, it's opening up nonstop right now. And I think that's what we're going to see in this vintage, but it shows such a linearity in fruit. But then these complexities really start to open up. That acidity really finishes nicely. The tannins are there, but they're not aggressive. They're really supple. I think sexy is a great word for the 2018 wine. And I think hopefully somebody will bid on it and get to experience it too. But I think across the board, the 18s are going to be beautiful, no matter the producer. We didn't do a whole lot of craziness in terms of whole cluster or new French oak. This is roughly 25% new with 7 different clones of Pinot Noir, actually from 11 different blocks we pulled from. My employees hated me when we put the blend together because I said, take a gallon from there, 2 gallons from there. But that's what's special about this. This is a 5-case one-off lot you'll find nowhere else. It's a really fun wine, so thank you.
So I understand what you're saying about the blends and all that, but the name of the wine is called Fear of Missing Out. Is that you didn't want to miss any of the different lots when you put the blends together?
Say it's the fear of missing out of Alexana. The marketing team would say that. I would say it's a fear of missing out the 2018 vintage, because this is one for the ages. Like I said before, you're not going to probably see another one of these. Hopefully we see it again this year. You never know. But I think this one's, you got to get it, because once 18s are gone, you're going to wish you had it. So don't miss out.
Thank you. Let's move on to King Estate. Brent, talk about the winery and yourself and the wine, please.
Great, yeah, thanks, David, and great presentation, Rachel and Bryan. Good review of the wines. My name is Brent Stone. I'm the COO and winemaker of King Estate Winery. I have been with the company for 10 years now and quite enjoy it. As David alluded to earlier, we are a bit further south than most of the wineries. We are about 20 miles southwest of Eugene, so the very southern end of the Willamette Valley. The winery itself was founded in 1991. We were founded by the King family, all of which are still active in the business today. So we now have a third generation of family members that come to work here every day, which I think is pretty cool, and not always the case anymore. Let me see, vineyard size. So we have a fairly big piece of property here. We're about 1,033 acres total size. About half of that is under vine. We have had kind of long-standing commitment to sustainability. We were certified organic back in 02, 03. And then in 2016, we became certified biodynamic. That makes us currently, I believe, the largest certified biodynamic vineyard in North America. So it's a pretty big commitment at scale when you look at kind of what some of those practices entail. You know, it's the same emphasis as organic in terms of, you know, lack of synthetics. We kind of take it even a little bit further. We have a partnership with Cascade Raptor Center here in Eugene, where we take rescue birds and release them on property, and they kind of help with pest control. We have sheep that we use on the property to mow and fertilize, and it's generally this kind of emphasis on the bubble, you know, this localized inputs, rather than kind of certifying parcels here, parcels there. The whole property kind of rolls into this biodynamic approach. You know, we have our own bakery on site, our own charcuterie on site. We have gardens, orchards, all that feed our restaurants. So big emphasis on kind of farm to table, sustainability, you know, and certainly when it comes to wine and terroir and sense of place, you know, you're really pushing those elements with this type of model. So it's a neat place to come to work every day. In terms of the vineyard itself, some additional characteristics. So we have a few different soil types. We definitely are dominated by bell pine, that kind of marine sedimentary soil. So, you know, a little bit deeper root systems, generally get kind of thicker skins, higher tannin, a little bit more dark fruit in our Pinot, as opposed to maybe some of the red fruits you get up north and some of the more volcanic soils. So we're a higher elevation site, as I mentioned earlier. We are about 1,100 feet. So we typically come on late. That can be a good thing because we also source off property. So we kind of start north and work our way home. So in terms of just winery logistics, it works out well. Our cluster size is generally pretty small, again, which pushes kind of a little bit more just overall tannin and structure in our Pinot, you know, regardless of the vintage. The particular lot here, so our wine is called Blackjack. And that is kind of a little bit of a play on the card games. It's all 777 clone, 777, 21. So just having a little bit of fun with that. We have a number of clones on property. We really like 777 here, just the nature of our site. You know, it comes on a little bit earlier, and we're a late site, so it can be pretty advantageous in terms of us getting to play around with hang time, and it just typically does well here year over year. So we wanted to really feature this particular clone. It is planted in some of the oldest blocks on property. So we kind of planted in a series of about 3 or 4 major kind of successions. And this is some of the oldest blocks. So these are like mid-90s vines. Again, grown biodynamically, and then that kind of carries over to the winery. So the wine itself was made 100% per the biodynamic certification. So really, almost completely hands off, you know, similar to kind of what Bryan was saying. You know, we don't get too fancy. We put a lot of emphasis on just grape growing and sourcing, and then just kind of get out of the way. So no use of synthetics or DAP, or, all we're really using here is temperature to kind of control the fermentation, just moderate extraction, and then, maceration techniques. But other than that, we're really just kind of letting the fruit do its thing. We've grown quite comfortable with that approach over the years, and have liked the wines that have come out of that general approach. A couple other specifics, I guess we did about 20% whole cluster. We generally just kind of, we'll grade the fruit as it's coming in, and we'll pick a couple bins that just have really lignified stems, really mature wood, and those go in as whole cluster. Let me see, it's about 30% new French oak, 18 months. In terms of characteristics itself, the flavor profile, we're really pleased in general with the 18s. This particular clone and wine, shows a lot of really nice fruit, a lot of raspberry. And then we also get kind of some subtle, like, floral spice notes. I think some of that might be coming from the stems, but it marries well with just kind of the general extraction that we're seeing across the vintage. And then, and again, great acidity too. So we think, as I mentioned earlier, it's certainly drinking well right now, but I think this will sit down for a number of years. So in general, pleased with the wine, pleased with the vintage. We bottled 5 cases June 11th. So I think that more or less covers the wine, but thank you guys for the time and for having us, and pleased to be a part of it.
Cool, thanks. And this morning, is it opening up quickly? Is it staying closed? What's your take?
Yeah, a little bit a little bit tight early on, opened it up and it was a little bit closed, and then I've come back to it a couple times. Just it's been open a couple hours, starting to open up a little bit. That's where I started to get a little of the floral and the spice. So a lot of complexity there, which is neat. And we've seen that in general with the 18. So, but yeah, I'd say still a little tight.
Yeah, you would think given the elevation of the vineyards, the coolness of the vineyards, and kind of the length of time in barrel, all those things kind of go to build a very long ageable wine, it would seem. Let's move on to lot 64 from Redhawk Vineyard and Winery. John?
Thanks, David. Let me just do a little bit about the winery itself. My wife and I bought it in the summer of '05. Just July 20th was our 15-year anniversary. The winery was started, I believe the first vintage, although the old owner is a little bit vague, was made in '86. Actually, David and Harry Peterson Nedry's garage with Russ Rainey from Evesham Wood and Keith Orr from Tempest. That was the first vintage of Redhawk. He built the buildings in '88, and it was very small, 1,500 cases when we bought it in the summer of '05. We do about 6,000 now. We're still very small. And we are about 71% we sell out of the tasting room in the wine club. So we only go to 10 states. The whole model is to be local. We're right on the edge of West Salem. We literally, my property boundary is the urban growth boundary. I'm just outside of it. 110 homes were built across the street in the last year and a half, which is really good for your business in a tasting room when they can all walk. So we've grown it quite a bit, but we're probably not going to get any bigger as far as our production. We were lucky. We have a 15-acre vineyard, 5 acres of which were planted in '78. They're own rooted. Part of this wine comes from the oldest planting here, and I'll go into that a little bit later. And we're about half on rootstock. So we have to address a lot of things during the year. I talked a little bit about the tannins, and oh my God, Rachel, I can't believe you went 30 days. I thought I was doing a lot at 5 or 6 post-maceration after we were done, just to try to tame things a little. But wow, I can't wait to taste some of those next time I'm over at John's. But this particular bottling, we've taken part every year since the beginning of the auction, and it's the last few years I've been doing this. So we do single vineyard. I have 1 acre of Pommard, own rooted, planted in '78. And then I buy a tiny bit under 1 acre from Zenith Vineyard, which is on rootstock, but was planted in '98, but still pretty old vines, over 20-year-old. So I wasn't real clever with my name of Yola Amity Cuvée. I should have played off some kind of study in Pommard, but it's my favorite clone. I never blend these together. These are all single vineyard, both blocks, but we do these 5 cases just for this auction. We blend together, and typically, it's interesting that we typically will pick the zenith fruit between 7 and 10 days after our fruit. And while it's ripe, it'll have lower sugars. And that pretty much is true every year. It's interesting. We're more or less at the same elevation, about 5 miles apart as the crow flies. But for whatever reason, that Pommard ripens at lower sugars than mine, which is great because I like lower alcohols and I like more elegant wines. And, you know, this was a vintage that you could make powerful but elegant wines pretty easily without even trying that hard. So, you know, we all talked about this, that this was kind of get out of the way, except for a little bit of tweak here and there, and just let these wines go. So I also opened this about 8, and it was very tight, but it's showing just terrific fruit now, some cherry and raspberry and blackberry, and just an underlying kind of tea leaf thing going on throughout the finish, the whole thing. So I really think it's interesting. These two together just added a little bit more layer of complexity than the single vineyard bottlings, which is really cool for this auction. Yeah, and these fruit, they have structure and gracefulness, and you know that it's hard to do that in most vintages. And this was one that we really could, I think we could all accomplish that if you just tried a little, to keep more elegant wines, but yet are going to be dark and powerful and are going to live really, really long.
What's the wines tasting like this morning? Obviously, any wine tasted before 9 a.m. is going to be a little weird, but is it in your mind starting to open up, or is it still a pretty closed wine?
It's opening up a lot from 8, and honestly, as I talked about, I was worried about tannin, and this wine has tannins, which probably will serve it well in the long term, but just in hour and a half that it's been open, I'm starting to see it soften, and the fruit's coming forward. And you know, typically, it's one of the ways I judge how well a wine will age is leave it open for 8 or 10 hours and see what happens. You know, without gassing it. And this suggests to me that it's opening up more and more and more. And I'm sure my staff and I are going to finish this afternoon, this bottle. I can't wait to see what it tastes like then.
Great. There was one question that I saw back a ways from Eugenia, my partner, who is 2 stairways above me. She asked Rachel, what is the soil that you're on?
Oh, what soil? Actually, we have a very, very rocky site. It's volcanic in origin. Where these grapes were grown, it's going to be on the Rittner soil type. The entire property is Rittner, Nakaya, and a touch of Jory at the very, very bottom. But the wine comes from 3 blocks, so 777. So I'm happy to hear that we're kind of all, there's a little bit of 777 in this, Wädenswil and Pommard. So I love that the 777 is also a little earlier ripening, but it has just great forwardness while still being low in alcohol. I love the Pommard. It just gives the whole wine body. And then I love the spiciness that comes from the Wädenswil. And just a little bit about how this wine tastes. It's very dark in color. And just to roll back, it was only 30 to 35 days total on skids.
Oh,
I mean, I didn't leave for the Bahamas or anything after. So that was the total length on the skins. Post fermentation of that was about 10 to 14 days, which was like really long for me. But so just to clarify that one. But the wine is quite dark, and right now, so I opened this last night. We had it with some cedar plank salmon, very good with hot dogs and s'mores. But it was really last night, just to describe the way this wine tastes, it does not have that kind of earthy character that I feel like a lot of Oregon Pinot Noirs do. It has really focus concentrated dark fruits, more in the blackberry cassis realm, and spice. So that's the kind of our vineyard, especially along the western slope. That is like the real calling cards for how our vineyard tastes. So this wine is just an example of that. And then there are some kind of like orange notes, like bergamot tea to that. And on the palate, it's got just a really pleasantly astringent, kind of like a black tea tannin structure to it, where you can kind of feel it's just got a little bit of texture to it, which I love. I like texturally interesting wines. And then there's just like a density of the fruit. It's not a sweet wine. The fruit is not sweet, but it really lends itself all the way from the front, all the way to the back palate. So it's got a real focus and concentration to it. And it's opened up quite nicely.
Good. With what, 14 hours?
Yeah.
So there's some aging potential to this wine, one would think.
Absolutely. I think the whole vintage, it's a great vintage for laying down.
Yep. Good. Julia, I've noticed a couple of questions and some important comments from you about Pinot and S'mores being sort of the ultimate Pinot Camp pairing.
You know, I would say proceed with caution with that pairing, but I have found success with it at OPC at our post-salmon S'more Fest. I think there are certain wines. I remember Cullen Clemens 2007 being a very nice S'more pairing one year.
So did the success of the S'mores and Pinot pairing depend somewhat on the amount of Pinot drunk by that time?
Well, I was working, so I will simply say that as the social media gal, I was by that point still pretty cogent. But that I think for other people, yes, your mileage may vary, but yes, that would help.
The char on the marshmallow is key.
Yes, yeah. So I'm a charred marshmallow all the way person, and I think that makes a difference.
Are we off topic here? I'm not sure.
Hey, we got a good question from registration that I think would be an interesting one for this group in particular, because you represent different sizes of production. And the question was originally for small producers, but I would put it to all of you. At your production size in the Willamette Valley, what is your biggest challenge in your category as a Willamette Valley Pinot producer? What are the biggest challenges that you face?
Yes, I'll take this one.
Go for it, Bryan.
Since I've made kind of the big and the small and kind of what I'm at now, which is roughly about 12 to 15,000 cases. And it seems like a big swing, but I think in Oregon, people don't understand, you get a half a ton per acre difference pretty easily year after year. And that's a big chunk on a 56 acre vineyard. Nothing like Brent down there with his size of vineyards, even bigger swings. But I think, especially in a condensed harvest, I think making capacity at this boutique scale, we don't ferment anything bigger than 2 or 3.5 ton really fermenters. So making sure we're getting going and kind of get the wheels turning pretty quickly and hit it hard pretty fast. So it can be a pretty fast up and down for us. So keeping the team happy is the biggest thing for me, because we're all hand punched down. We're all hand sorted, triple sorted, once in the vineyard clusters and then berries. So really making sure I have the labor force in the vineyard and in the winery at that peak, and that they're trained. So I actually bring them in about a month before we'll see any grapes to get the team trained up. Julia actually worked with me one year, and she's done great at the Willamette Valley Wine Association. But it's been fun to watch these interns really thrive and grow. But it's a bit of a pound in the face for about 3 or 4 weeks there when it's all coming in, especially in a weather event here where you got to bring it in and you don't have a choice. But we're fortunate that we do have ample capacity and space and ability to do it here, but it can make for some long hours. So it can be challenging at our boutique kind of high-end scale.
I think go ahead. Go ahead, Brent.
I'll just kind of add to what Bryan said a little bit, just because we're probably a little bit different than a lot of folks just with our scale here. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is just footprint. So, we'll do around 4,000 tons in a harvest, but that covers a pretty big area. I mean, we source all the way down to Rogue Valley, all the way up to Walla Walla Valley. We have a pretty robust club program, and we make, you know, we're a large winery. We make a lot of small lot wines. I think we did over 60 wines last year, and the bulk of those are like, you know, 200 to 500 case production lots. So we're trying to obviously stay loyal to kind of our big brands and what keeps the lights on. At the same time, you know, we're doing a lot of this kind of boutique level production. So we're almost just like really big, small winery. So we haven't, as we've scaled over the years, we haven't added big tanks, and we haven't added a lot of efficiencies. It's like, you know, gondolas, and I mean, the bulk of our picks, everything comes in hand picked, and we, you know, it's a bin at a time, and 2, 5, 8 ton fermenters. And so, you know, we are trying to monitor 400 different fermentations, 26 different grape varieties. So there's just a lot going on. And so I think what we wrestle with sometimes is, as you tend to get more kind of vintage variation in Oregon compared to other areas, is just being able to adapt to those conditions year to year and still really focus on every single lot, every single wine, and really push quality across all of those programs. And, you know, some years are easier than others, as everyone on the call here knows. So that's why when you get a vintage like 18, where you really are able to do that, you know, you get this super wide pick window, and you can really maximize every single tank, every single program. I mean, we don't often get that luxury. So I would say, in terms of the challenges that we face year to year as a winery, we rarely have had it as good as we did in 2018. So while I'd say it is a challenge, we were very fortunate in this particular year.
And what I was going to just kind of add with our size, so we're about 5,000, 6,000 cases right now, is that we've got 36 blocks. Our winery is mostly estate grown, and just being, I would say that's kind of mid size for Oregon, but in the grand scheme of things, quite small. And I would say my biggest challenge during harvest is just, I agonize over picking dates. And there's just something about taking like a whole acre, if it's only cropped at like 2.5 tons per acre. And by the time, if you're destemming it, it just fits in one vessel. And it just represents an entire year's worth of work in one vessel. I don't know why, but it always makes me feel a little sad when we pick and you walk out in the vineyard and there aren't any grapes there, because you just take so much physical space and just condense it. And so just how precious that is, and just the fact that it truly is a concentration of labor, love, and effort. And so it can be sometimes quite agonizing just knowing really how much is on the line and how hard so many people have worked for an entire year, and frankly even before that, to set that vintage up. And so just agonizing over the picking dates, to just pinpoint every single block and every single clone the best I possibly can for that vintage. So those are kind of my big conceptual struggles during harvest.
David, if I could just add on, for me, and I'm looking, I think I'm the only owner winemaker. So one of the struggles as a small winery and being the owner and the winemaker is, and my wife is the accountant, is we have to make wines that people buy. And we all as winemakers love experiments and little small lot stuff, and let's have a little project over here. But you know, I have 2 hats, and as an owner, I've got to look at, is it economically feasible to do that little study? And are we ever going to get anything out of that? You know, even down the road with other wines. So that's always been a challenge. I mean, I make wines that I like, although my wife sometimes says you need to make wines that other people like. So, you know, we're always constantly going back and forth on this of tweaking our lineup to make more of the things that sell better and less of the things that don't. And it's kind of, with 2 hats, always a little bit of a struggle when you're small.
Great answers. Thank you. Julia, do you have another question that we could put to our panel?
I do, and this is just a question that I have. When I teach seminars on the Willamette Valley to people in different places in the US, a lot of times consumers will ask, why do you talk about clones so much with Pinot Noir? My question for this panel of excellent winemakers, and it's always fun to get owner perspective, sales perspective, but when I have all winemakers, I'm going to ask nerdy questions. when does clone become the most important? Like in what circumstances, what conversations does clone really factor in? And have your choices of clone changed over the last few years in terms of what you're using or what you're blending?
I think we should talk about rootstocks too. I would love to talk about more than clone.
Absolutely.
But I think it's something as in my opinion, as consumers begin to learn more about the grape growing aspects of wine, it's kind of the natural place to start the conversation, and it's the language that we can all talk. And so I think it's great. I think it's a great starting point. But I find that sometimes the rootstock and the location can matter just as much as clone.
I agree with that. I think, rootstock spacing for sure, where you're planted at is a big driver. But to me, I think Pinot Noir is being one of the most mutated and has the most clones, if you will, for a variety for the most part, is a really special thing, because I worked in Washington and made 26 different varietals and got to play with every grape you could think of, including Pinot, which maybe shouldn't have been planted in some places up there, or in Argentina where I worked for the owner's other winery quite a bit. But to me, Pinot Noir's clones are almost like their own different varietals, if you could think of it that way. The 777 being an earlier ripening, almost like a Merlot, and then the Wadenzils and some of the other stuff, 828s that come in really late. To me, they each have their own intrinsic qualities, although they're very minute differences because they're all Pinot Noir and still very much Pinot Noir, and it's a delicate grape. But I think it shows off some of those different complexities, like the spiciness of 115 or the acidity of some clones, or the color and the Mawr being a really fun base blend for me. I think, to me, it's the clone is really important. And I've always been a big fan of some of the original clones, like the Mawrs and Wadenzil that were planted here in Corey. And I think the Dijon clones, though, have really taken hold, obviously, over the last 20, 30 years. And the 115 is probably something I've started to plant more. We have a new 40-acre property right next door we're planting as we speak. And I've utilized a bit more of the Dijons over there than typically what we had on the estate that was planted about 20 years ago. So not much different. I think the old guard, like one of the gentlemen on the call, who has really set us up for success for clonal selection and site selection, has really helped us, in the last 50 years. And we're just fine tuning it at this point, these little 1%, getting some of these heritage clones, getting some of these Missal selections. Like, I was on a Zoom call with Louisa yesterday, who's got some great old, selections from their properties over there. So I think clone is super important, but I do agree that site and rootstock make a big difference too.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I would just, I think that's why we all love Pinot, right? I mean, it shows kind of where it was grown more than any other variety, I think, in my opinion. And it shows clonal variation more than most varieties. And that's what makes it so awesome. And clones will show differently even across vintages. Certain clones will do well one year and not as well another, depending on what you're going for, and that makes every year unique. And so I just think that's what's special really about Pinot Noir, Oregon Pinot Noir, clonal variation. And I think that's why we all probably love making wine where we do. So yeah, I just kind of echo what you guys said. I think it's a really neat thing about what we do.
Yeah, and I'll just add that. So I came into this, I was a consumer when I bought the property. I mean, I learned winemaking with consulting help, and I was always a Pommard fan, and I have some Pommard. But in 07, I grafted 3 acres of 108 Chardonnay over to Pinot, and we picked 777 because and I have Dijon 113 and 114 also on the property. It just gives you as a winemaker more tools. You've got an earlier ripening 777, you've got later ripening stuff, and given the vintage and the weather and everything else, just having more tools to do your blending later, it just helps. And that's what all the different, one of the benefits of having all these clones of Pinot Noir is it even within one variety gives you a lot of leeway in what you can do as a winemaker.
We're running out of time. We have about 5 minutes left. I wonder if the panel could speak to why somebody who is a bidder in the auction would be interested either in any auction lot because of the 18 vintage or specifically in your auction lot?
I'll just start quickly. So, you know, if you're a fan of Mawr, would be one reason to look at our lot. We've got a blend of two vineyards with really old vine Mawr, and then pretty old vine Mawr. So, you know, that's one thing that would separate us a little bit versus some others. But also, if you're a bidder, and this is the 18 vintage, and we're in this. I mean, look, we're all on a Zoom call in a tasting, but you know, we're not all tasting. This might be a great opportunity for you to get in and buy some great lots of great wine. With the online bidding, it's just not going to be the same as a live bidding, and so, you know, persistence will matter, I think, and so that's one of the reasons I think that you would want to bid, whether on my lot or any lot this year in this auction.
There are likely to be some good deals, is what you're saying.
I wasn't quite that overt, but yes.
Others?
If this tells you anything, there's nothing left in my box.
So they're going to have to move quickly if they want some of your wine, huh, Bryan?
We might have to go open another bottle this afternoon, so we're going to be down to a few sample bottles left. So, but killer vintage, I think across the board, all of the lots will be a great purchase. But we'd love, of course, for you to buy Alexana. But I think just anyone who can support, especially in a tough year like this, and hopefully we can get back next year. But yeah.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. Well, this is our first year participating in the auction. And so I think for bidders who have never tasted our wines and who want to see what a cool site in the Eola Amity Hills on a hilltop tastes like, I would say in particular, if your palates align for kind of the darker fruit and the spice, I think, again, like I think everyone's saying, it's just a great vintage. And I think pretty much all the lots are I'm sure going to be spectacular. But for ours specifically, I would say if you're interested in darker, spicier fruit and kind of want to get a taste of what we're doing and the wines of Bryn Mawr.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think you've got, you know, one of the best regions in the world for Pinot. You've got some of the best producers in the world. You know, the Willamette Valley, I think you're going to be hard to go wrong with any of the lots. You know, ours, if you were interested in maybe kind of what the Southern Willamette, how that might be a little bit different from some of the folks up north and maybe biodynamic production and stuff, then, you know, our lot would be worth a look. But I think you're not going to go wrong. I think there's just a number of great producers, great wines. So I think it's, and a great vintage too. So, you know, hopefully a successful auction for all.
Cool. I really want to thank the panelists, Rachel, Bryan, Brent, John, for opening a bottle of wine, or at least consuming part of a bottle of wine early in the morning on behalf of the Willamette Valley Wineries Association and this amazing auction. Part of the proceeds will go for the first time, possibly the only time, to a charitable organization that has recently, so it's James Beard Foundation, but it's recently set up this one fund that will invest in Black and Indigenous people's food and wine related businesses. So this is a unique sort of spin-off from the events of 2020 and makes this wine auction a very, very unique thing. I hope we can count on the support of people that are viewing and who may view this this video as time goes forward. Thank you again to the panelists for your time and your wise thinking and comments. Julia, it's back to you.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, panelists,
David.
for a wonderful discussion today. Thank you, attendees. We all wish that you could be here with us in the Valley right now, but I hope we brought a little bit of the Willamette Valley to you. I did drop the auction information again in the chat for your reference. And we hope to see you next week, August 11th, 12th, and 13th, the online auction. The link to register to bid, if you have not already done so and you are a trade, is right there in the chat. And we will have a live close on the 13th to finish it all up. So we hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.